Thanks, you guys, for coming. I'm really excited to kind of talk to you tonight, but I do have to warn you, this is a brand new presentation for me. This is something I've not shown anybody else before, so it's going to be a little rusty. I'm still working out the jokes, I guess. I don't know. I'm still working out the presentation. Um, it's it's all kind of in service to, I have a book coming out in September 15th, called Cursed Objects, and it's exactly what Robert described it as. It's a book about, it's a compendium of about 50 different cursed objects from around the world that, I tell their entire histories of. And you can pre-order it now. After I talk, you can pre-order it. But what I thought I would do is kind of give you some backstory of this project I came on. I'll tell you some stories of cursed objects, but also tell you some backstory around the whole project. I have some slides to show you as well. But I did want to say that when I took on this project, I was a little bit trepidatious about it. So I knew from my own experience of writing about weird stuff that victims of cursed objects aren't just owners of cursed objects. It's also people who visit cursed objects, people who show an interest in cursed objects, people who write about cursed objects. There's multiple stories of journalists, succumbing to the supernatural powers of a cursed object. So I was a little trepidatious going into this, knowing I'd be doing all of that, visiting them, writing about them, thinking a lot about them, bringing one into my home. I'll tell you about that one too, as well, tonight. But here's the thing: I don't really believe in the paranormal. Not for any good reason. I just haven't had an experience, right? Casper hasn't come to me yet. So I don't really believe in the paranormal. Although I ended up believing in cursed objects, and I'll also tell you that story tonight as well. But even though I didn't believe in the paranormal, I didn't think cursed objects could actually harm me. I was a little trepidatious that over the course of this project, I would come to some kind of inadvertent harm, right? So a lot of people who are in the annals of victims of cursed objects, they died of natural causes, but forever, their obituary says, was investigating Ötzi the Iceman in Italy, or something like that, and it kind of overshadows their whole life. So I'll show you exactly what I was afraid of. Let me start sharing my screen with this presentation. Give me 2 seconds to big screen this. Robert, you guys see that okay? Perfect. So this is what I was afraid of when I first started this book. Something would happen to me, and this would be my obituary, right? J.W. Oker of Nashua, New Hampshire, died last week from a freak Pringles can accident, which that's how I'm going to end, I know. He is survived by a relieved wife and 3 daughters. He was in the middle of writing a book about cursed objects, so it's kind of his own fault. This has happened to a lot of people in history who died just being connected, even vaguely connected to a cursed object. It kind of became their story. They are no longer J.W. Oker. They are victim number 8 of cursed object number 12. So I was a little trepidatious about that. Nothing happened. The book's over. I've already written it. And far from it actually hurting me, I started falling in love with cursed objects. I became fascinated, and I love them now. And I'll tell you about that as well. But they were surprising. They surprised me at every turn. And what I've done in this presentation tonight is I put together all of my surprises as a result of writing this book. And I'll tell you a few stories of the cursed objects en route to those surprises. But man, these things surprised me a lot. So the very first surprise that hit me when I first started this book was that famous cursed objects are rare. And what I mean by that, cursed objects are everywhere. There's a million stories if you just dig around, but actual stories that rise to the level of history or culture or pop culture, there's not a lot of them. Like, for instance, if this project was about haunted houses, famous haunted houses, I would need, 8,000 books to fill up all of the famous haunted houses there are in culture. But cursed objects, there's not that many. I mean, I had to dig really deep to get the 50 I got across the globe. They're really good stories. That's the good thing about that, is there's no kind of filler. They're all really tight stories. The other thing I did was that anytime you start a nonfiction book project, you immediately, or before you start it, before you even pitch it, you look around to see if somebody else wrote this book already. Because if they already wrote it, you're dead in the water. It's done, unless it was done a long time ago. And I looked around for that, and there aren't any books like this, compendiums of the most famous cursed objects, or entire histories or stories. There's a lot of paranormal books that kind of touch on cursed objects briefly, or in short ways, or in more general ways, but none of them are doing what I wanted to do. And the closest I saw to people doing what I wanted to do were listicles online, which is what you have in front of you. This is a YouTube screenshot. 10 terrifying cursed objects that exist, top 10 supernatural objects, 9 cursed objects. Here's a Google search result: 10 allegedly cursed objects, 10 creepiest cursed objects, 7 terrifying cursed objects, 10 cursed items from around the world. So you can see, obviously, listicles, you want 7 to 10 things in them. But the interesting thing is all these listicles, it's pretty much the same 10 objects over and over and over again. And not only are this the same to objects, some of these objects aren't even cursed objects. They're haunted objects. They're possessed objects. They're other kinds of objects, which I don't fault anybody for, because that's my second surprise. Besides, not being surprised by how few famous cursed objects there were, my other surprise was that cursed objects are absolutely confusing. Just defining what a cursed object is, you think it would just be making sense, but it isn't. So there's two things I had to define. First is objects, because everything can be cursed. People, places, ideas, everything can be cursed. But I wanted it to be objects, physical objects, and I really wanted it to be things. My criteria was things you might accidentally get at an estate sale, or things you might accidentally find at a yard sale or an antique shop, things you might accidentally bring into your home. That was kind of my theme of what the objects I wanted. And by and large, that's what's in the book. There are a few larger cursed objects in that when the stories were really good and they just could not include the story. But in general, that's kind of what I was thinking. But then the curse part, that's the hard part. So you can see this is a Venn diagram, so there's an overlap here. What is the difference between a cursed object, a haunted object, a possessed object? Sometimes there's no difference. So I tried to come up with definitions. So for the cursed objects, the way I kind of defined them was no intelligence. There's nothing motivating these objects. Nothing even good, bad, or neutral. They're just, for whatever reason, connected to a lot of tragic events and unlucky events. But they also commit serial harm. And what I mean by serial harm is that it doesn't just hurt one person and that's it, it's done, or one time. It needs to either affect multiple people or have the potential for affecting multiple people. So those are my two defining elements of a cursed object. With a haunted object, by comparison, it has an intelligence. There's usually, the idea is there's something possessing it in a ghostly sense, and they're rarely harmful. Most ghost stories don't have harm in them. There are some, obviously, but most ghost stories are just creepy, you get scared, you run away, and you never go back there ever again. A good example of this, on those listicles, almost on every single one of those listicles, is an object called the Haunted Mirror down at the Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana. I've been to this plantation, I've seen this mirror, I gazed in its depths. The stories around it are pretty creepy. You see shadow people in it, apparently, that aren't in the room. I don't know if that's scary or not, but they're not in the room, but they're in the mirror. Tiny children's handprints appear out of nowhere, just kind of going up the mirror. So a very kind of scary story, but it never hurts anybody. It's just creepy. So not really a cursed object. I mean, the idea of cursed means something bad has to happen because of it. So if it just scares you, it's not really any kind of harm. Possessed is a little bit different. There's an intelligence to it too, right? But we usually refer to that as demonic. And it's harmful on purpose. Like the whole point of a demonic entity is to be bad. Whereas a haunted entity, whatever that is, in the stories, it's just what it does. It's not necessarily evil. It's neutral or sometimes even benign, but a possessed object wants to inflict harm on you. And that's not really what I was looking for either. See, you could define almost like a weapon as a cursed object, the way I defined it, right? There's no intelligence in a knife or a gun or a spear, and they can hurt multiple people. It can hurt as many people as you want. Line them up. You can hurt them as many people as you want, but that's not really a cursed object. That kind of like intelligence driving that gun, pulling that trigger isn't really a cursed object. It's just a weapon at that point. So I had to kind of draw these lines, but then it gets more confusing than that because this is a Venn diagram, so there are overlaps. So what if it was a haunted object that caused serial harm just naturally, not on purpose, not meaning to? It's just has an it's a haunted object that acts as a cursed object. That's kind of a cursed object, honestly. Again, it's a judgment call on the field, but it seems like it's a cursed object. Whereas a possessed object is, again, like the gun. It's a demonic entity that commits serial harm on purpose. Although the demonologists, the experts will say that objects cannot be possessed. Only human beings can be possessed. So we've got that going for us, that we can be possessed, but objects can't. So if you're in the middle of an exorcism and the crucifix flies off the wall at your head, it's not the crucifix that's possessed, it's the person writhing on the bed. So that's kind of the difference there. And then there's two more overlaps that I don't know what to do with, so my math is a little bit off. There's haunted and possessed, which I don't know if I've ever seen an example of. And that's just an odd couple. That's just a bad roommate situation, I guess, to have two things in an object like that. And then there's whatever's in the middle, which I don't even know what that is. It's cursed, haunted, and possessed. I don't have any examples. I don't know if I want any examples of that. So it's really confusing, and they're rare. So even though they're rare in reality, my other big surprise was that the place they're not rare is in the movies, or in stories. You can say stories. I say movies because I get to use movie posters, and it's a lot more interesting. Cursed objects give us entire genres. This is right now a collection of horror stories, right? So we have Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. That's a cursed book. So is The Babadook. That's a cursed book. Brain Scan is a cursed video game. Hellraiser is a cursed box, the Lament configuration. Oculus is a cursed mirror. Christine's a cursed car. The Ring's a cursed VHS tape. Deathgasm is cursed sheet music. Drag Me to Hell is a cursed button. And Cabin in the Woods has a basement just full of cursed objects. And the interesting thing about this is you don't usually think about these movies as cursed object movies. There's a very small subgenre of literal cursed object movies, but really most horror films are cursed object movies. There's some inciting thing that happens, some object that ushers the evil or the monster or the thing into the world. So all these movies are cursed object movies. Yeah, even Hellraiser, which, I've watched a million times and never thought it was a cursed object movie until I started researching cursed objects. My favorite cursed object in movies, though, and hopefully your screen of little people isn't covering this up, but is this thing. This is the cursed lamp from Amityville. I can't say that. Amityville 4, the Evil Escape. So this is the sequel to the sequel to the sequel to the Amityville Horror, which was based on a real story that took place in Long Island. But at some point they ran out of real life material, so they just started throwing stuff out of the house that was cursed. In this case, it's an anthropomorphic, spooky lamp that I really like. I want one. If I could find this thing, I'd put it in my house in a second. But it's easy to pick on the horror genre when it comes to cursed objects. Really easy. But it's not just the horror genre that gets defined by cursed objects. The fantasy genre is absolutely ridden with cursed objects, right? Harry Potter is a bazillion cursed objects all across all the movies. Jumanji is a cursed board game, and these days the new movies it's a cursed video game. Indy's always looking for cursed objects. Indiana Jones. The Mask, that's Jim Carrey finding the cursed mask of Loki on the beach and turning into a cartoon character. And then of course Pirates of the Caribbean, who have whatever. I think there's cursed objects in the titles of those movies. And then, of course, Lord of the Rings, right? The one ultimate fictional cursed object of all stories, the one ring to rule them all, is a cursed object, a really nasty one. And pretty much, the ultimate cursed object in our fiction and our movies. And I'm going to use that segue to tell you guys a story that's actually in the book that involves a cursed gold ring. This is the Ring of Silvianus. It's a real ring. It dates back to thousands of years ago to ancient British times, actually Celtic times. It was found in 1785 in England when a farmer was doing farm stuff to his farmland, which seems like a pretty good find. You found a gold ring dating whatever thousands of years ago. That's amazing, but it's almost a common occurrence in England. England is so old, thousands of years of history on this tiny little island that you can drive the length of in 8 hours. So it is like nubbly with artifacts. So this is happening all the time. Farmers are always finding this stuff. This particular ring, like I said, was gold. It had a concave image, and this is the actual picture. This isn't like a folktale, or this is the actual ring. A concave image of Venus on it, the name Synesius on it, and then the phrase in Latin, something like "God will protect me" or "well kept by God," like that. And it was written backwards because the image was concave because it's a signet ring. So when you press it in wax, that Latin phrase reads from right to left, and then that convex image becomes concave, and you have a nice little seal. As far as Silvianus' name, that's the owner of the ring. So this was found. It was given to a local or sold to a rich family named the Shoots that lived nearby in a 16th century estate called the Vine, V-Y-N-E, and just kind of added to their collection of rich people stuff. And really no story around it, nothing. It's just what it was, a gold ring from old times, until one of the Shoot family put together another artifact that was found about 80 miles away from this ring, in a place called Dwarf Hill. It was called Dwarf Hill because it had, had legends of dwarfs and magical creatures cavorting around it. But what was on Dwarf Hill was an archaeological site for a temple dedicated to the ancient Celtic or Briton god Nodens. Now, Nodens was the god of hunting and the sea and healing. So all the old gods were like multitaskers. They all kind of had a lot of different roles in life. But anyway, at this temple archaeology dig, they found a defixio. Now, a defixio is a curse tablet. They're found all over Europe. Thousands have been found. They're thin, really small, usually made out of lead because they're soft enough to engrave, and curses are engraved in them. And then they're given to gods who can fulfill those curses for you. This particular defixio, this is actually a a replica of the defixio. This is the real ring, the replica of the defixio, had a very interesting message on it. And this message was, again, in Latin, but I'll paraphrase it. And it said, this curse tablet is for the god Nodens. I've also given half of, my name is Silvianus, and I have had a ring stolen from me. So I am making this curse. I am dedicating half its worth to Nodens. And it was stolen, I think, by a guy named Synasius. So may Synasius never have anything good happen to him, or anybody that took the ring never have anything good happen to them. So this guy, the shoot guy, put together, oh my goodness, here is a 1,000-year-old curse tablet for a guy against a guy named Synasius who stole a gold ring. And here's a gold ring named with the guy's name Synasius right on it. It's a very interesting story. The idea being that both these men are at the temple, and then Synasius stole Silvianus's ring. And then the idea is he put a counter charm on this ring that, oh, God protect me. It was actually misspelled on the ring. So the idea is maybe he got it engraved really fast and made a mistake, but he had to get it engraved fast because he knew he just stole this from a temple with a god where you could just make a quick defixio and get cursed. So it's an amazing kind of story in that we're piecing this together. Who knows if it's true? It's not a giant leap because Synasius wasn't like the name John Smith. It was Synasius. That this ring was cursed by Nodens, the god, as a result of this cursed tablet. But the story gets more interesting because in the 1920s, 1929, an archaeologist named Mortimer Wheeler was digging around Dwarf Hill. He wanted to learn more about the defixio, wanted to learn more about the cursed ring. So he needed an expert in Anglo-Saxon. So he called up Oxford, right? Because it's in England and that's where all the big brains in England are, in Oxford, and said, hey, I need a professor of Anglo-Saxon to kind of explain to me some of these markings and why this ring is misspelled and all these different things. And he got one. He got a professor at Oxford by the name of John Ronald Rule Tolkien, this guy. So this gold cursed ring was introduced to Tolkien in 1929 or 1920s, but it was like 7 or 8 years before Tolkien would give us The Hobbit with its famous cursed gold ring in it. So here we have a real life cursed ring influencing the most famous fictional cursed ring. And you can go see the Ring of Silvianus today. It's in, so the Vine estate became a historical house in England, in Hampshire or Silchester, I think. And it's on display in the ring room. That's what, if you look, that's what this display is, this conical display. They have it displayed with a copy of the defixio. I think the real defixio is in a museum somewhere else in England. And then, of course, in that same room, they have, a first edition of The Hobbit to kind of tell the entire story. So cursed objects were surprising me in general, but specifically every single one had this amazing story behind it that just had layers and layers. But to get back to my surprises now, another surprise, which probably shouldn't have surprised me, I just want to put it in there, is that everything in Egypt is cursed. Every single thing pulled out of a tomb is cursed, has a curse story around it, whatever. And yeah, it makes sense, honestly. If anything is cursed on the planet, it should be ancient Egyptian artifacts, because the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with eternal life. They were obsessed with taking it with them. They were obsessed with getting everything together in tombs and, rising to the next life with all their riches, all of their servants, all of their animals. And here we go, digging around in there and pulling them out and putting them in museums, looting them, doing all this kinds of legitimate and illegitimate work to their tombs. And of course, they're going to be mad about that. Of course, they would curse their tombs. And there's a few kind of famous ones up top here. This is the double mummy is actually, it's one image doubled. I don't know why it does that, but that's the Nesbin mummy. That was the British guy who pulled that one out of Egypt. It's always British guys pulling things out of Egypt. The British guy who pulled out of Egypt actually died stampeded by an elephant. An elephant killed him. That mummy is actually in Rhode Island. I think I saw some people from Rhode Island. If you guys go to the RISD Museum in Providence, the cursed Nesbin mummy is on display there. Below it is the mummy board. It's the Unlucky Mummy. That's the name of it. That's the actual name of it in the museum catalog. The Unlucky Mummy isn't a mummy. It's just the lid of a mummy, the top sarcophagus of a mummy. But this mummy lid is pretty much the template for all cursed objects. It predated King Tut. It predated a lot of these other artifacts. It's supposed to be responsible for everything from the sinking of the Titanic to starting World War II. It's today or it has been for whatever, a couple hundred years, on display at the British Museum in London. You go there, you see it. You'll overlook it every single time. It's in a room full of Egyptian wonders, and it's just a board, a mummy board. And you're like, oh, whatever. But if you look into the history, it's responsible for like dozens and dozens of deaths, according to the story. And if you look at the actual museum card on this, they call it the Unlucky Mummy. It's just kind of a superstar there. And then, of course, this guy, this mummy, the actual mummy you're looking at is King Tut. The ultimate cursed object is King Tut's tomb and all the artifacts inside of it. It and the Hope Diamond are the two biggies, right? That's the two big cursed things that we all know about. And I won't tell you the story of King Tut's curse because its victim list is like a serial killer. It's just a massive, massive list of dead and maimed and unfortunate people. But I want to tell you how the curse started because it's so fascinating and kind of hilarious. There's death involved, but it's still kind of hilarious. So the person who found King Tut's tomb was a man by the name of Howard Carter. He was an archaeologist, another white British guy. He was funded by another guy named Lord Carnarvon, another British guy. They knew the Boy King was around. There's a record of the Boy King, of King Tut, but nobody had found his tomb. And for 5 years, Howard Carter tried to find this tomb. And the way they found it was one of the people in his party stumbled over a stone. They looked at the stone. They started like brushing stuff away. There had to be a set of stairs. It was about in the right place, about in the right spot. So he immediately called up Carnarvon, or whatever, telegraphed him, or whatever they did back then, and said, "You got to get here now. I think we found the tomb, and we should open it. We should be there together. We should both have the honor of doing this. It's your money and my smarts, so we should do this together." So Carnarvon booked it down there. They dug up the stairs and went right down to his door, and it validated it was King Tut's tomb. Then they buried it right back because it was the very end of the archaeological season. They have seasons down there. I'm not sure if it's weather or government related, but they have seasons down there. So they didn't have time to even look in to see if there was anything in there, if it was looted or if there was treasures or if King Tut was still there. They had no idea. But anyway, they covered it up. They had a whole entire off season to make plans. Lord Carnarvon went down to Aswan to hang out. And while he was there, he started the entire curse of King Tut by having a shaving accident. He was shaving. He had a mosquito bite on his neck. He nicked the bite and got blood poisoning and died. And that small thing, a shaving accident, started the entire King Tut's curse. See, what happened was, as part of his plans for opening the tomb, he sold exclusive rights to covering it to the Times in London. Only they were allowed to go down at that moment of opening the tomb when it would happen. Only they were allowed to be around while they saw if King Tut was there, while they cataloged all these treasures. Only the Times was allowed to do that. All the other newspapers in London and all the other newspapers in the world had to stay behind the velvet rope with all the tourists gawking on. So all the newspapers had to get like we're going to have to get second, third, fourth, fifth accounts, which weren't very exciting. The Times would get all the readers. But the second Lord Carnarvon was dead, they didn't need access to the tomb. They had their story. They had the curse of the pharaohs taking its very first victim, the man who funded the dig to find King Tut. And from there, boom, anybody who suffered misfortune that had any connection to this dig or this tomb or setting up this tomb was on the list, on the list of victims, all because Lord Carnarvon nicked himself shaving. I've seen a lot of Tut artifacts in Egypt. I've been to Egypt before, but they're supposed to have a whole showing of it in Boston. I don't know if it's going to happen now because of COVID, but there's supposed to be a whole showing of his artifacts in Boston in June. And then they're all going to England for the unveiling of the Grand Egyptian Museum, which is one of the largest museums in the world. Hasn't even opened yet. And all of the Tut stuff, any Egypt stuff is going in that museum. So we're seeing if the world ever opens up. But until then, just know that King Tut's pretty famous because of a shaving accident. All right. So going from a spooky mummy to this next surprise, cursed objects aren't always spooky. So one of the knocks that people have against the idea of cursed objects is that we project the curse onto the object. You see something spooky, of course there's something screwy about it. Of course there's something supernatural about it, something worrisome about it if it looks spooky. This is why every single doll on the planet is cursed or haunted, because they're just freaky. If they're not in a child's hands, and even then they're freaky. So that's why everything, whatever, cursed dolls are a whole genre, subgenre, subgenre. But the truth is, what I discovered is most cursed objects aren't spooky on their surface. So that kind of argument against them falls flat for me. And I'll show you why. I'll show you a little test. Let's do a test together. You might want to back up from your screens a little bit for this one. So 2 objects here. One of these is undeniably creepy. And when I tell you a little bit more about it, it's going to be even more creepier. So on one side, we have an antique chest of drawers. That dates from the 1800s. On the other side, the mummified head of a German serial killer nicknamed the Vampire of Dusseldorf because he drank the blood of his victims. Obviously, one of these is super, super creepy. Super creepy. And I'd make it's the severed head. Okay, I won't even make a joke about it because I can't hear anybody laugh. So it's the severed head. That's the super creepy thing. But the cursed object between these two is actually the chest of drawers. That's the conjure chest. That chest is famous for being in the family of, her name escapes you now, but she was a Pulitzer Prize winning essayist. That's supposed to have killed, more than a dozen members of the family throughout the generations. Anybody that put clothing in this chest of drawers, whoever's clothing it was, either died or suffered some misfortune, usually died, again, over the generations. Meanwhile, the mummified head of Peter Curtin, the Dusseldorf vampire, zero cursed stories about him after his death. Obviously, super dangerous when he was alive. I think some 60 to 80 victims. But as an artifact, once he was executed and his brain was examined by the scientists because they wanted to know what kind of horrible creature, what kind of a brain a horrible creature like that could have. Turned out a normal brain. There's no cursed object stories around him. In fact, not only are there no cursed object stories around him, you can take your family to see this. I would say tomorrow, but as soon as the world opens up, you can go see this. It is in the Wisconsin Dells, the famous vacation spot of water parks and fudge shops and t-shirt shops and arcades. It's in the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum there, right on the main strip, rotating slowly on a hook. You can go see. I've seen it. I've taken my kids there and seen it, but it's not cursed. You're fine. Go see it. It's a little disgusting. You can see everything down to like his fine nostril hairs, but it's not cursed. You're fine. But this is kind of what's insidious about cursed objects. If your family goes through a series of misfortunes, you're never, ever, ever going to suspect the furniture. You're just not. That's never going to cross your head that maybe it's the ottoman or the pantry. You're never going to get there. So a cursed object, and that's why a cursed object like this, the conjure chest, stuck around in this family for like 7 generations, them not knowing that putting stuff in there would hurt them. So very insidious cursed objects, especially when they're normal. And there are some normal ones in the book. I have 2 different chairs, 2 different cursed chairs in the book. Fascinating stories, but still at the end of the day, they're chairs. Even though cursed objects, and they can be spooky too, even though cursed objects are a little bit scary, my other surprise I find out was that also they're a pretty good business if you want to get into it. So what I have here are 4 different cursed object museums or haunted museums or, whatever. Remember that messy Venn diagram, weird objects. Up top there, that's Greg and Dana Newkirk. They run the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. They go to conventions all over the world with their objects and let people interact with them. They live with them. They travel with them. If you read any of their stuff on their websites or looked at any of their videos, they love cursed objects. They're not scared of them at all. They love them to death. And if they're in a town near you, you can see their cursed objects and handle them and experience them. Beside them, the guy with the glasses is Zach Bagans. He's famous for being the star of Ghost Adventures, the paranormal reality show where a bunch of people get mad at ghosts and try to provoke them. Notice he's standing in front of a cabinet full of dolls. Again, all these people have tons and tons of dolls. Dolls are just the #1 scary thing on the planet for some reason. But anyway, about 2 years ago, 2 years ago, Zach Bagans opened up a museum in Las Vegas called the Haunted Museum, which I've been to. And it's full of cursed objects and paranormal objects and serial killer memorabilia. It's a very intense experience. And when I got there, the line was wrapped all the way around the building. And it was the hot Las Vegas sun. It was almost noon. It was awful. It was awful. They had to have those amusement park sprinklers to cool everybody down. But everybody wanted to get into this haunted museum. So pretty good business. Below him, that's Lorraine Warren. Lorraine and her husband, Ed Warren, were famous, probably the most famous paranormal investigators of the modern era. They pretty much made the template for what a paranormal investigator is and what they do. All the famous cases they're involved in somehow, or there's the Enfield poltergeist or the Amityville horror, they had some hand in either being there, investigating it, or finding ways to merchandise it. They were just everywhere. In fact, if you watch the Conjuring movies, those movies are all about the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren, and their case studies. And over the course of their career, with their paranormal empire, they just accrued cursed and spooky objects. Right there behind Lorraine is probably her most famous, right? The Annabelle doll, which is just a Raggedy Ann doll, but so famous it has its own trilogy of movies about it. So Ed died in 2006. So what's that? 14 years now. Lorraine died while I was writing the book. She died about halfway through. I think sometime in 2019. I was actually literally writing the book when I got the news that she was dead. So their collection right now is in a little bit of limbo. It's always a private collection that they opened up to the public for events. Right now it's in a little bit of limbo, but they did have family and friends involved, so I'm sure that thing will open up again, probably in a more public way than it ever has been. And then beside her is John Zaffis. He is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, actually. He's related to them. He, probably above all these people, is probably the most connected to objects as opposed to ghost hunting. He somehow made a niche in that world. He had a TV show called The Haunted Collector for a while there on the Sci-Fi Channel, where he would go to people's houses, find objects that he believed was, or they believed was causing trauma or bad luck or misfortune, pull them out and do some kind of negating ceremony on these things involving salts and sunshine and prayers and holy water and crystals to kind of take the negative energy out. And then he would put it in his house because he collected cursed objects. It's actually a building beside his house. I've gone through it once. He invited me over one time to see it. Lots of dolls, lots of clowns, the usual characters. But again, has made a career out of cursed objects. All these people basically have. So, but there's another way to be involved in the business of cursed objects without being a professional paranormal investigator, and that's to go to eBay. There is a thriving trade of cursed objects on eBay. This is a screenshot I took just a week ago. Again, dolls. But also, a Dybbuk box, a cursed item Mayflower. I don't know what kind of ornament that is, but you can just scroll through them constantly. And honestly, from my experience, these are pretty reasonably priced. I've seen them get up there, at least be asked $400 or $500 for them. That $107 active haunted vessel, paranormal spirit doll, demon entity, crazy, scary, cursed object is only $100 to steal. So I wanted to get involved in this because it's an interesting part of the book. There's a whole section of the book called The Business of Cursed Objects. But the way I write books is I have to be involved. I can't just write a kind of an objective narrative of things. I have to be involved. The word I is like the word I use the most in any book, which is annoying to a lot of people, but I can't be interested in the subject matter unless I'm immersed in it. So I knew that not only would I have to visit some cursed object, not only would I have to research and write about cursed objects, I would have to own one. I'd have to go buy a cursed object. And my only chance of doing that was eBay. So I scoured eBay for weeks. I had very, very definite criteria for what kind of a cursed object I want. It had to be small because I wanted it to sit on my desk while I wrote the book. It had to be not grotesque because even though, you see in my office, I like some grotesquerie, but it couldn't be so disgusting that I couldn't look at it. And it had to be cheap, both for practical reasons, but also because I felt a little icky kind of contributing to this marketplace of cursed objects. So I finally found, it took me weeks. And during those weeks, what happened was I started getting targeted ads from eBay that looked like this. Cursed items on eBay. Seriously, we have cursed items. So I would go about my business on the internet and this ad would follow me. I think this is probably a Google search results ad. And, really, really selling the cursed objects. I know this is programmatically made. Nobody actually made this ad, but still it's kind of funny that they are really pushing their cursed objects on eBay. So anyway, I finally found the object I wanted. It was perfect. The story behind it was very vague, but basically somebody's father had brought this object over from overseas, and the second he brought it over, it caused him no end in harm. There wasn't a lot specific about what harm it was, but apparently really ruined a lot of his life. And then it went to his child or children or whoever it was that I bought this from, and really hurt their life as well. So they were getting rid of it. That's what they were doing. And I won the auction. I got it for $14.78, which includes shipping and handling. And it was a cursed bulldog. It was a little bronze. I have it here. I don't know if you guys have the the big window or not, but I have it here. It's a very heavy bronze paperweight. And you can see the message she sent to me after I won the auction. It says, "I'll be shipping this in the morning. As soon as we cleanse our house of this curse, the story I told in the listing is true. We have lived under the gloom of a dark cloud. The curse brings my entire life, my father before. Hope you are prepared. Just so you know, we have been contacted by Netflix's Haunted series, so you may see our story there one day. May you live in interesting times. May you draw the attention of people in power, and may you get what you ask for. I pass the curse onto your house." And it's about that moment when I first read that last line that I had my second thoughts. I was like, wait, am I actually passing a curse onto my house? I mean, I have a wife and 3 daughters. It's a little bit more than just me doing a gimmick for a book, right? Am I really kind of putting myself in danger? And at this point in time, I still hadn't believed in cursed objects. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But so I still had that stutter where I was just like, is this a good idea or not? But, you see it for yourself. She had 2,553 good reviews. So it couldn't be that bad. So I went, and it's too late. I already bought it. She was in the process of mailing it to me. It came about 3 days later. So she earned those stars. I think I even gave her 5 stars. 3 days later, nicely packaged. And then she scrawled all over it. May you live in interesting times. May you attract the attention of people in power. May you get what you ask for. Underlined, right? So then it was about this moment, 3 whatever days later, when I realized, oh, I'm not actually getting a cursed object. I'm getting the experience of buying a cursed object. That's exactly what she's selling me, and selling me well. Usually when you think of buying a cursed object, or you see it in movies, it's you go to Chinatown and you find this tiny little shop with antiques piled everywhere and a very ancient man lit by candles trying to stop you from buying anything in his collection because it will hurt you. I mean, that's how gremlins start, right? That's kind of how you think about it. But here in the digital age, and I just have to click buy now button and I get it shipped to my house, they need a little bit more of an experience. So this person was really building that up for me. So I think what I bought was an experience for $14.78 and not a cursed bulldog, which, by the way, I've named the cursed cur, because if you have a cursed object, you have to give it a good dramatic name. It has to sound like the title of a Sherlock Holmes story. Otherwise, it's not very interesting. It's just a bronze paperweight. But anyway, I got it. I put it on my desk while I wrote this cursed objects book. I carried it around with me, and I had a pretty good year. Not just a pretty good, I had a great year, personally and professionally. A lot of great things happened to me that year. So I don't know if it's actually a blessed object or not, but nothing really happened, which didn't disappoint me. I don't want to say that, but it didn't. I wanted the end of the story to be, and I had to get rid of it. So I called up the Newkirks, or I called up Zaffis, or I called up Bagans, and I had them take it off my hand and put it in their museum. But that's not what happened. I kind of fell in love with it. It's become my memento of the trip, of the whole journey of the book. I even took it down to vacation with me. I was really pushing things. I took it to vacation with me. I took my family down to St. Augustine, Florida, because it's a cool city, oldest city in the country. My kids are New Englanders, so they don't know what a warm beach is. So I wanted to show them what a warm beach is like, what a warm ocean is like. And what I didn't tell them is I was really going down to St. Augustine because I wanted to see a cursed object. That was the whole point of that vacation. They have in St. Augustine a museum there. One of the oldest blankets in history. I think it's Middle Eastern. It's made out of cat hair. And when they found it, it was wrapped around a mummified foot. So the story is, if you walk on this rug, you will die. It's that simple. It's hardly even worth an entry. It's that you walk on it, you die. So of course the museum had it hanging on the wall, so you couldn't walk on it, but the mummified foot was right there in front of it. I'm trying to remember the name of the museum. I didn't put notes in front of me. Like I said, it's the first time I've given this talk. But you'll know it. You can just search cursed cat rug in museum in St. Augustine, you'll find it. So nothing bad happened. So that's me and the cursed cur right here, living through our time there. And again, like I said, this is before I kind of started believing in the power of cursed objects. So let's say that you guys also are a little bit more interested in cursed objects than you should be, but you don't want to do this. You don't want to bring one into your house, but you still want to see one. I've got good news for you around that, because my next surprise is that every major museum is cursed, because every major museum has a cursed object somewhere in its depths. In the book, I would say about 60% of the objects in this book ended up in museums. Usually there was some historical or monetary or cultural value to this object that it ended up in museums. Another big percentage are lost to history. Another percentage are outside. I do a whole section on cursed objects in graveyards, for instance. But mostly they end up in museums, and to kind of, which means you can go see them anytime you want. And to kind of show you this, I've made this little graph of everywhere there is a cursed stone, all the famous cursed stones. And the cursed stones, they generally all have the same story, with exceptions. And that story is they're found in India, especially if they're a diamond, because for a long time, diamonds only came out of India. The South American diamond mines hadn't been discovered yet. We thought they only came out of India. So they start in India. They get stolen, usually from the eye of an idol. They get carried over to Europe, where they're subsumed into crown jewel collections. So in France, in England, even in Russia, this happens. And then at some point, some of them come to the US, where our burgeoning aristocracy of wealthy people, which is usually businessmen and entertainers, want jewels, but don't just want any jewels. They want jewels with stories behind them. So the jewelers, will make a curse. And that's actually, that last one is particularly the story of the Hope Diamond. Most of the Hope Diamond's cursed story has a huge, huge, amazing, fascinating story. But the cursed part of the story pretty much comes from Joseph Cartier, the famous diamond guy, who was trying to sell it to Evelyn Walsh, but she could buy any diamond, so he needed to give it a curse story. So he elaborated on curses that were kind of already around it. But anyway, after that, they end up in museums, because at some point in time, either the people that own the diamonds or their children or their children's children needed a tax break or needed some influx of cash, so they got donated to museums. So today, if you want to see any of these cursed objects, you go to the Smithsonian to see the Hope Diamond. You go to the Tower of London, they have the Koh-i-Noor, the Black Prince's Ruby, which is inset into a crown. The Louvre has more than art. They have the Regent and the Yellow Sancy. The Natural History Museum in London has the Delhi Purple Sapphire, which is actually not a sapphire, it's an amethyst. I always get a little sad when I see images of the Delhi Purple Sapphire because I went to go see this one in London, and it's been in the Natural History Museum of London for centuries. But the day I went, and it was the only day I could go, it wasn't there. There's a little card in the pocket where they keep the amethyst saying, "Sorry, the Delhi Purple Sapphire is off for cleaning," or something like that. And I missed my chance to see this cursed object. But I have seen the Star of India. That's in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, so easier to get to than London for most of us. And then, of course, the Black Orlov is in private hands. I'm not sure if those hands are Scrooge McDuck's hands, but it's somebody who has a lot of money and they now own the Black Orlov. So that one you can't see, but the rest of these are all in big public museums that you're going to be around at some point in your life because of where they're located. All right, so we go from cursed jewels that have been around in human culture for centuries and probably longer than that under the Earth's crust, see, Freudian, to the thing I've been hinting at all this time, why I now believe in cursed objects. This is surprise number 8 for me. Science actually believes in cursed objects. So I'm about to lay a little bit of groundwork for this one. In 1955, a Harvard doctor by the name of Henry K. Beecher introduced the world to the placebo effect. Not the effect itself, just the term. The idea of the placebo had been around in medicine for centuries, but he kind of gave it the term and codified it and gave us something to test. He was famous for a few reasons, but one of his big fame is he was involved in those secret military LSD tests on soldiers. That was kind of one of the big things he did. But anyway, he also gave us the placebo. So placebo is a Latin phrase for "I will please." And the thing about a placebo is, and you probably already know this, but I need to go through it, that the human body can trick itself into healing, right? So if you have a headache, the doctor can give you a sugar pill that is not scientifically proven to cure headaches, give it to you, tell you it's Tylenol, tell you that it will cure your headache, and your headache has a chance of going away. It doesn't happen every single time, but it can happen. Your body will just just convince itself that you have Tylenol in your system and stop the headache. And that's weird, but even weirder, science has shown that placebos work even if you know that they're placebos. That means a doctor can give you the sugar pill for your headache and say, "Hey, this is a sugar pill. I still think it's going to cure your headache." You take it and your headache can go away. It's a mysterious effect. We still don't know everything about it, and I don't know anything about it, but doctors and scientists still don't know everything about it, but it is, scientifically validated. They're still kind of investigating it. But anyway, I tell you all that about the placebo because 6 years later, a man by the name of Walter Kennedy introduced us to the nocebo effect. This isn't Walter P. Kennedy. He's not as famous as Beecher was, so I couldn't find an image of him, so I just grabbed the nearest black and white image. It just happened to be able to go see. Well, Walter P. Kennedy told us about the nocebo reaction. Now, the nocebo reaction happens when you're given medicine and given fake side effects. So a doctor can give you a pill. It can be a real medicine or it can be back to the sugar pill and tell you, this pill has side effects. You're going to have a headache. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to break out in hives. And you can experience those side effects, even if he was lying about them. Because just like the body can trick itself into healing itself, the body can also trick itself into harming itself. And you can see where this is going, right? They use this anthropologically to explain voodoo death. So voodoo death is a phenomenon where somebody is cursed to be a zombie and then becomes a zombie. They lose their appetite, they stop talking, they walk around listlessly, they become very susceptible to suggestion. And just the fact that somebody told them they cursed them to be a zombie, they think the body just turns them into a zombie, basically. So you see where this is going, right? I can give you the cursed cur, I can hand it to you and say, "Hey, I'm giving this to you, but you have to know it's cursed, and you're gonna experience all the effects of a dog allergy. I'm just gonna have to warn you in advance." And honestly, your body could trick itself into experiencing all the effects of a dog allergy just for owning this piece of brass. So the body can convince itself to harm itself, which means that the idea behind cursed object is sound. The mechanism is unknown, but the idea is sound. And obviously there's a limit to that as well. It doesn't make you lose all your money, although you could possibly see how you could trick yourself into losing all your money if you pick up a cursed object that has that reputation. Also, nocebo is Latin for the phrase "I will harm." So the opposite of a placebo, which is I will, what was it again? Sorry, friend, please. "I will harm" should be the tagline for every single cursed object on the planet. In fact, if you remember back to that Venn diagram, that's how I define cursed objects. It had to do serial harm. Nocebos are kind of just the basis, could be the scientific basis for cursed objects. So I found that fascinating, and I was really glad that I learned that after I'd already hung out with my cursed cur for a few months. Sticking in this realm of science and modernity, the other kind of scary thing about cursed objects is they're also modern. So usually when we think of cursed objects, we think of antique, old, dusty, cloth, wood, very close to earth materials. But it can also be cursed. This is a picture of James Dean and his spider. After his death in the spider, the piece of it went to other cars and those people died, and all kinds of stories are on the wreckage of James Dean's cursed Porsche. Also, the Prague horloge. I don't know if you guys have been to Prague, but there's this giant medieval clock, the oldest working medieval clock in the world, on the side of a building there. Tells celestial time. There are figures on it, moving figures, saints and martyrs and skeletons. It's an amazing, intricate piece of machinery, also cursed. But for some reason, in my head, and maybe in yours as well, I can suspend disbelief that wood and cloth can be cursed to plastic and metal and rubber can be cursed. It makes sense. They're all physical material. It's fine. But what if I told you that programmer code could be cursed? Digital artifacts can be cursed. So here is some examples of that. So phones. There is a number that was released by a telecom in Bulgaria that its first 3 users all died young and violently. Below that, that's the Berserk cabinet from a 1980s video game. One of those was in a arcade in Illinois. It has 3 deaths associated with it from playing it. Spotify isn't cursed, but there are definitely cursed songs out there. The Hungarian Suicide Song is a real famous one that was kind of banned on British Airways because it was rumored that people would commit suicide if they heard the song. It's a very sad song. But today you could download that song on Spotify and get the curse that way. The Red Room, this red box down here, it's just a pop-up on your computer. You could be minding your business, doing away, going to websites, fending off pop-ups for ads and GDPR and cookies, all those kinds of things. And suddenly a red room pop-up will pop up. And that means you have 24 hours to live. Within 24 hours, you will die. And it's called the Red Room because at the end of those 24 hours, the walls of your room will be coated in your own blood. So pretty vicious. Again, just a few lines of code is all that pop-up was made out of. And yet an entire mythology and urban legends around it. Those other 2 boxes, this fiery dog and this white box over here, are both tweets, cursed tweets, right? Your mom will die in 30 seconds if you don't forward this post. We all remember that from the early email days, right? Cursed emails, which is another digital artifact, where if you didn't forward an email to 40 of your friends, Bloody Mary would come attack you in the night. That has changed to every way we communicate digitally. Text messages, social media, Facebook posts, Twitter posts. There's always a cursed post running around, whether it's a cursed image. One of these is the cursed image of Robert the Doll. If you see it, you're cursed unless you apologize to it. So even in the digital world, we're not cursed. We have cursed objects. So whether it's made of wood and clay or lines of computer code, it's still cursed. And what that tells me is the materials don't matter. Cursed objects are a very, very human thing. That's what that tells me. There's something about us that clings onto this idea of cursed objects. And that's my number 10 surprise and my final surprise of the night. And why I eventually fell in love with cursed objects is that they are amazing storytelling devices. Whether you believe in the paranormal or you don't believe in the paranormal, or you accept the scientific explanation of nocebos, where you fall, cursed objects are powerful storytelling mechanisms. They most folklore is ephemeral and vague, right? It's told from the lips to somebody's ear. It's read on pages to the person's eye, very ephemeral. But cursed objects give this physical weight that a story can be wrapped around. This right here is a picture of Evelyn Walsh. She's wearing the Hope Diamond. Now, the Hope Diamond has a whole fascinating history of itself. It starts in India and goes through 2 or 3 countries and ends up in the capital of the United States. A fascinating story of this jewel. But along the way, it gathered stories of other people, and it gathered the story of Evelyn Walsh, who was one of the owners. Her family died tragically. Some of her kids died before she did. One spent a suicide leave. Her and her husband divorced. Ended up in insane asylums. They lost fortunes. But we wouldn't probably know the story of Evelyn Walsh if it wasn't for the Hope Diamond. So these cursed objects just collect stories, and they're all tragedies, obviously, but they collect stories, and that's just to me a very compelling thing, a compelling example of a way. They're memory devices to help us collect stories of those who have had harm befall them, of those who have died, of those who have been involved in situations like that. So I don't know, I just love this idea that I can pick up this cursed cur. I don't have any good stories for it, but at some point maybe I could. So that's it. Like I said, the book comes out September 15th. You can pre-order it now, and I definitely highly suggest, if you're going to get it, if you're planning on getting it, if you pre-order it, that helps me out. You can do it on Amazon, bookshop.org, indiebound.org. Your local store will probably pre-order for you. It's a beautiful book. It's put out by Quirk Publishing. They do a real good job. All these illustrations are from the book. It's fully illustrated. It's hardback. It's kind of the kind of book you can give to somebody, and then it feel like a real gift, a real artifact. And just to warn you, it also is cursed. We put a book curse in each book. Book curses are a big medieval thing they used to do back when they couldn't have a million copies of a book and they had to protect the one copy they had. They put a book curse into it. So we made sure to make sure every one of our books was cursed as well. And that's it. That is my tour through the world of cursed objects. There's some 50 different stories in there. I told you just a few tonight, but hopefully got you interested in the idea of cursed objects as a phenomenon. I don't know, Robert, where do you want to go from here?
So JW, let's see, why don't you stop exactly. So that's great. I'm going to stop my recording.